Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. This is Kathy, and today I'll be sharing a 3-step fun fold card using the Snow Fun Penguins stamp set, as well as the Stitched Border Trio die set. I'll also be sharing some tips on how I colored in the penguins without using a black marker at all. I started out by stamping the images onto a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock with Memento Tuxedo black ink. And the first color that I use when coloring in my penguins is YR24. And I add that in the areas where the shadows are going to be the deepest and the darkest. The reason I started with YR24 is to do underpainting on my little penguins. Underpainting is something that I have been practicing a lot lately. And what the underpainting does is it desaturates your darkest color. So in this case, after I was done with the YR24, I came in with BV29 and went directly over the YR24, but I also extended a little bit further past where I stopped with the YR24. The reason that I continued with the BV29 past the YR24 is because Copic markers are transparent. So by extending the BV29 further than the YR24, you're going to get the real true color with a white background of the BV29. I guess the best way to explain it would be if you have a piece of mustard yellow fabric and you have that next to a piece of white fabric, and then you take a black fabric that's semi-transparent and put it on top of both of the mustard yellow fabric and the white fabric, you'll see a difference in the color. The black fabric that's on top of the mustard yellow fabric will be more dull, and the black fabric that's on top of the white fabric will be brightened up because the background or the underlayer is brighter. And I really hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please feel free to leave a question in the comments section down below, and I'll try and clarify that a little bit better for you. Anyway, getting back to the coloring, after I was done with the BV29, I came in with BV25 and extended that out just a little bit further. One of the things that I have found to be rather hard to do is keep a highlight on an image like a penguin. So what I like to do is leave white space, and it's a very, very small amount of white space. Then when I come in with my lightest color, in this case it's BV23, I'll actually put the tip of the marker in the white space and color into the BV25. There's a fine line. You want to be careful that you don't scrub with the BV23 into the BV25 because it will fade out the BV25 quite a bit. So it's a pretty quick motion when I come in with the BV23 and blend it into the BV25. And here on this penguin, I'm showing you with my pokey tool where I left the small little white spaces and how I come in with the BV23 and fill in the white space and just do a quick swipe with that color. It does end up blending in nicely, but again, you want to make sure that you don't scrub it, otherwise you can end up fading out the BV25 quite a bit. For this third penguin, I did the exact same technique with the underpainting. So while I'm coloring in this guy, I'm going to throw in a couple of disclosures here. The first one is I really don't consider myself a colorist or any type of Copic professional. I just like to color. The other thing is when it comes to the quote-unquote rules of Copic coloring, there are only 3 that I follow. Again, I don't consider myself a colorist. I just like to color. But the 3 rules, quote-unquote, that I follow are good cardstock, and my preferred cardstock is Cougar Super Smooth. Good ink, my preferred ink is Memento Tuxedo black ink. And the third rule that I follow is making sure that my markers are nice and full. If your markers are dry, you will have a very difficult time blending because there's not enough ink coming out of the tip of the marker to blend in with the other inks that are already on the cardstock. Now, case in point is my BV29 marker is very, very dry, and I probably shouldn't have been using it because if your markers get too dry, you can end up ruining the nib on the marker. So with that being said, we'll move along here and I'll share with you how I colored in the white areas of the penguins. And for the white areas, I started out with N2 and I added that in the areas where there would be darker shadows. Then I blended that out with N0 and then I did a quick swipe with my colorless blender just to get rid of some of the harsher lines. And when I come in with the colorless blender, I do put the tip of the colorless blender into the N2 and I draw it towards the center so that the very center portion of his belly is the brightest white. And you do have to let the ink settle into the cardstock a little bit. I know sometimes it's tempting to go back over it a second time, but you don't need to. Once the ink settles in, you'll see that it blends quite nicely. I'll be sure to have all of the Copic markers that I used, as well as all of the products that I used, listed in the description box below for you. And again, if you have any questions, don't be shy. Feel free to leave them down in the comments section and I'll get back to you. Moving right along for the 3-step card, you'll need a piece of cardstock that measures 5.5 by 10.5, another piece of cardstock that measures 4 3/16 by 5.5. You'll need 2 pieces of cardstock that measures 2 1/4 by 5.5, and then one more piece of cardstock that measures 1 3/4 by 5.5 inches. Next up, we're going to do a bit of scoring. So with the 10.5 inch side up at the top of your scoreboard, you're going to want to score at 1 1/4 inches, 2.5 inches, 4 1/4 inches, 6 inches, and 8 1/4 inches. I'll make sure to have all of those measurements listed down below as well. After you're done with the scoring, the first fold, which is the score line at 1 1/4 inches, that's going to be a mountain fold. The next one is going to be a valley fold, then another mountain fold, and you'll just keep doing mountain, valley, until the very end. Once all of the folds are done, that's what it looks like there. I tipped it up so you could see. After I had all of that done, I set that aside and I took the 3 smaller pieces of white cardstock, and this is where I brought in the Stitched Border Trio die set. I taped the dies right up at the very top edge of each of those pieces of cardstock and ran them through my die cutting machine. These are the 3 pieces that are going to go on the front steps to create the snowy banks on the front of the card. To adhere the pieces of cardstock to the card base, I found it easiest to put the adhesive on the card base itself, just to make sure that I didn't get adhesive where I didn't want it to be. The patterned paper that I used, by the way, is from the Blurry Flurries paper pack. And I adhered that piece first, and then right on top of that, I adhered my first snowy hill. Then to make sure that I had the second snowy bank adhered in the right place, I folded it up just to see where I needed to put the adhesive. And again, I put the adhesive directly on the card base. And then I did the same thing with the third snowy hill, which is on the very bottom flap of the card. After I was done adhering the snowy banks, it was time to adhere my little penguins to the front of the card. And I did run them through my scan and cut machine to be cut out for me. And for the penguins, I decided to use liquid glue. The first little penguin on the skis, I adhered him to the very back panel. And the reason that I used liquid glue is so I had a little bit of wiggle room to move him around if I needed to. So I placed him into place, and then for the Snowman penguin, to get him in the right spot, I folded up the bottom of the card, and I made sure to only put adhesive on the very bottom of that image, because if I had put it up any further, it would have glued the card closed. And the same thing with the snowboarding penguin. I just put adhesive on the very bottom and adhered him to the front. Then I decided I needed to have some sparkle, so I used my White Blizzard Nuvo drops and added that along the top edges of the snowy banks. In hindsight, this is something that I probably should have done before adhering the penguins in place, but you know, it was one of those things that I decided to do after the fact. And I used my finger just to spread the glitter down. And then I set that off to the side so that it had some time to dry. And while that was off to the side, I stamped my sentiment on a scrap of the Blurry Flurry cardstock that I had left over. And I used VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp my sentiment. And after I had my sentiment stamped, I just used my paper trimmer to cut it down, and then I used my scissors to cut the end off at an angle. And then I used my tape runner to adhere that to the very front of the card. And that's it. That finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, we'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.